If you're a DJ and you want to understand how cables work and what you need to know as a DJ about cables, you come to the right place because in this video, I'm going to explain how cables work. Now, as a DJ, we run into all sorts of different types of cables all the time. We have our XLR cables, RCA cables, TS or TRS cables. You also have PowerCon cables and what are also called IEC cables for delivering power. Now, I tend to distinguish between two different types of cables. I have the power cables. This is things that generally deliver some sort of electricity to the device to do work. And then you have signal cables, which are generally to deliver audio or some sort of control type of signal, but it's not at this huge high voltage to actually power the device. Now, this distinction can get a little bit tricky when you're dealing with speaker wires and passive speakers, but I find this distinction to be helpful. So the first thing to ask when you're looking at a cable is, does this cable deliver power to my system? Or is this cable there to deliver some sort of control, like an audio signal that I can then later amplify, or does it do both? Is it powering the signal or powering the system and causing it to do work? Now, the basics of any sort of cable, and for reference, I'm going to go ahead and grab my RCA cable, is you start with every cable has at least two conductors in it. Now, this is an RCA cable, and each of these, this is also known as coaxial cable, has two conductors. If you notice here, you have the tip, which is your hot, and the sort of sleeve, which is your neutral. And it's called coaxial because both the tip and the sleeve are kind of along the same axis down the middle. If you look at some sort of power cable, you have, most of the time, you have three conductors. You're going to have your hot, which is the one on the left. If you're looking at it straight on, you're going to have your neutral, which is on the right, and then you have a grounding prong on the bottom. Some gear does not have a grounding prong, and that's okay. Generally, it is safer to have grounding prongs, and I'll talk about that maybe in another video, but at least you need two conductors or wires. And the reason for this is inside of this cable, you basically have copper wire. And what copper is going to do is when you apply a voltage difference across it, the electrons in the copper are going to move. And that movement of electrons is what causes current and what allows your devices to be powered. The movement of electrons is basically allows you to do electrical work. So you apply a voltage difference, and this is what causes current to flow, which is why your plugs will have at least two prongs to deliver power. One of these is going to be the hot, which is where current goes into the device. And of course, if you were to take this is what you plug in. It does some work on the device, and then current has a return path to take, which it takes out of the neutral place. So that difference, you need the two wires, one at, say, some high voltage and the other at some reference voltage to do some amount of work. Now, when you're connecting your DJ gear, of course, you're going to need cables for your left and right channel when you're having your signal cables. And the reason for this is each cable can only send basically one type of waveform. So in the case of RCA, you have two, your red and your white, which will send a left and a right channel. Each of these has two conductors. You have your hot, which is the tip, and then you have your reference voltage returning, which is on here. Similarly, when you look at a TS cable, this is an unbalanced connection. You have your tip, which is the part above the little black ring. This is your hot, and then you have your sleeve, which is generally sort of your reference or your ground in this case. If you look at your XLR cable, and each cable is going to have a male end and a female end. The male end is the one with the little pokey things coming out of it. You can think about why this would be called the male end. I hopefully don't have to explain this to you. But if you look at an XLR cable, it actually has 3 pins, not just 2. And the reason for this is XLR can actually send multiple signals at once. You're obviously going to want to have your ground or your reference signal, which if you're looking at the male end is typically the one on the right, and you're going to have your hot signal, which is the one on the left, but you can also send an additional signal on the bottom or the cold pin. And what this allows you to do is send things like a stereo signal. So you can use one XLR to actually send left and right. You send your sort of reference or your neutral, and then you have your positive and your hot or your left channel and your right channel as well. So this is basically one thing you can use XLRs for. Your headphone jack, your 1/8 inch jack, is basically the same as a TRS, a tip ring sleeve, which is a 3-conductor wire, which is what allows you to have both left and right headphones. You're basically sending your reference and then your left and your right channel on a TRS cable. That is different than the TS, which is just the tip in the sleeve. You'll have a tip, some sort of ring, and then another sleeve. So that's a 3-conductor wire. Your XLR, while you can send a stereo signal with it, more often you use XLR in balanced configuration, which is much more resistant to noise. So that's what you see in a lot of the higher end or the pro end DJ gears. You have balanced outputs or XLR outputs, and that's why you'll have an XLR output for the left and the right. Now I'll talk about how that works in another video, but typically if you have the choice, it is better to use balanced outputs if you can. If you can't, what tends to work really well is have your DJ board, if you're using, most DJ gear is going to have RCA type of cables. Use RCA cables to get to something like a mixer very close by, within a couple of feet or something. I can use a small mixer like this. And then often the outputs of your mixer will be balanced, and you can use those for your longer cable runs. Typically, it's recommended you don't use more than 10 to 15 feet of unbalanced cable because those can pick up interference a lot easier than balanced cable. So once again, remember, cables are always going to have at least 2 conductors in them, and they're used for varying some amount of voltage and allowing current to flow to do some sort of thing, whether it's powering your devices or sending audio to a mixer or to speakers or something like that. So I'll have more to say about that in the future, but hopefully this has given you an overview of what you need to understand when it comes to cables and the different pins and everything. So see you in the next video.